The dentist and her patient, a feeling she couldn't treat. Dr. Maya Chen's hands had stopped shaking during procedures years ago, but on that ordinary Tuesday morning, as she leaned over her new patient's chair, her fingers trembled against the cold metal instruments. The man lying before her, eyes closed and vulnerable under the bright examination light, was someone she had spent 5 years trying to forget. His name was still written in her heart the same way it had been when they were 22. Ethan Rivers, the boy who had held her through her father's funeral, who had kissed her under cherry blossoms in their university's courtyard, who had walked away without explanation the week before their graduation. Maya had built an entire life in his absence. She had completed dental school at the top of her class, opened her own practice in the city's historic district, and created a reputation for being the kindest dentist children had ever met. Her clinic walls were painted soft blue, decorated with underwater murals she had commissioned from a local artist. Parents brought their anxious children to her because she had a gift for making fear disappear, for transforming tears into laughter. But Maya's gift had limits. She could soothe a screaming toddler, could gently guide trembling hands to trust her, but she had never learned how to heal her own broken heart. She had dated over the years, been in 2 relationships that her mother had desperately hoped would lead to marriage, but something always felt hollow, incomplete, like she was reading lines from a script rather than living her own story. When Ethan had called her office 3 weeks earlier, she hadn't recognized the name on the appointment book immediately. It was her assistant, Sophie, who had mentioned that the new patient had specifically requested Dr. Chen after reading about her work with anxious patients. Maya's stomach had dropped when she saw his full name, written in Sophie's neat handwriting. Ethan James Rivers, the middle name confirmed it. For 3 weeks she had considered canceling, inventing an emergency, asking her colleague Dr. Patterson to take the appointment. But something stubborn in her refused to run. She had built this practice from nothing, had poured her soul into every detail, and she would not let a ghost from her past chase her away from her own examination room. Now here he was, older but unmistakably himself. The same dark hair, though threaded now with silver at the temples. The same strong jawline, the same long fingers that she remembered intertwined with hers during late-night study sessions. He had opened his eyes when she introduced herself, and the recognition that flooded his face had been immediate and devastating. For a moment, neither of them had spoken. The air in the small room had felt too thin, too heavy, too everything all at once. Sophie, oblivious to the crackling tension, had cheerfully rattled off his medical history and left them alone. Maya had somehow managed to begin the examination, her professional training taking over when her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. She asked him to open wide, checked his teeth with methodical precision, took x-rays with hands that she willed to steadiness. Ethan had been a perfect patient, following every instruction, but she could feel his eyes on her whenever she stepped back to make notes. The silence between them was filled with 5 years of unasked questions, 5 years of wondering why, 5 years of moving forward while looking backward. It was during the cleaning, when her face was inches from his and there was no way to avoid the intimacy of the moment, that Ethan had gently caught her wrist. His touch had sent electricity through her entire body, the same spark she remembered from their first kiss in the university library, the same warmth that had made her believe in forever. She had frozen, her eyes meeting his, and in that moment, she saw tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. Without words, with Sophie just outside, the door and the normal sounds of the clinic continuing around them, Maya had seen something in his expression that looked like regret so deep it had carved lines into his face. The appointment had ended with professional courtesy. Maya had given him care instructions, scheduled a follow-up, and walked him to the reception desk as though he were any other patient. But after he left, she had locked herself in her private office and cried for the first time in 3 years, mascara running down her cheeks and her chest, heaving with sobs she had kept buried for far too long. Sophie had knocked gently, concerned, but Maya had composed herself and emerged 20 minutes later with red eyes hidden behind a smile, ready for her next patient. A 6-year-old girl who needed a filling and who deserved the full attention and kindness that Maya had promised to give. Ethan returned for his follow-up appointment 2 weeks later, and this time Maya was prepared. She had rehearsed what she would say if he tried to explain, had built walls around her heart that she believed were impenetrable. But Ethan didn't try to explain. Instead, as she worked on adjusting his crown, he began to talk. Not about them, not about the past, but about his present. He told her about his work as a civil engineer, about a bridge project he was designing that would connect two neighborhoods that had been divided for decades. He spoke about his mother's battle with Alzheimer's, about how he sang her the songs she had sung to him as a child, because sometimes the music would bring her back. For a few precious moments, he talked about volunteering at a homeless shelter every Saturday morning, serving breakfast to men and women, who reminded him that life could change in an instant. Maya found herself listening not just with her ears but with the part of her heart she thought had closed. There was something in the way Ethan spoke about service, about caring for others, that resonated with everything she had built her own life around. When he mentioned that he had moved back to the city 6 months ago to be closer to his mother, that he had been building up the courage to reach out to Maya for months before finally making the dental appointment, she felt the walls around her heart beginning to crack. Over the next 3 months, Ethan became a regular patient with an unusual number of dental concerns. A sensitive tooth here, a cleaning there, questions about orthodontics that Maya suspected he didn't really need answered. Sophie had commented with a knowing smile that Mr. Rivers certainly took his dental health seriously. Each appointment became a little less about dentistry and a little more about two people rediscovering each other. Maya learned that Ethan had left, not because he stopped loving her, but because he had been diagnosed with a genetic heart condition the week before graduation. The doctors had told him he might need surgery, might have complications, might not have a long life ahead of him. In his 22-year-old mind, terrified and feeling mortal for the first time, he had believed that walking away was the kindest thing he could do. He had wanted to spare her from becoming a young widow, from tying her life to someone who might not be able to give her the future she deserved. The revelation had come during a late appointment, after the clinic had closed and Maya had finally asked him the question that had haunted her for 5 years. Why did you leave? Ethan had broken down in her examination chair, this strong man who designed bridges and cared for his ailing mother, and told her everything. The surgery had been successful. He was healthy now, had been for years. But the guilt of how he had left her, the cowardice of his silence, had eaten at him every single day. He had watched her from afar through mutual friends' social media posts, had seen her build her practice, had been so proud of everything she had become, and had hated himself for not being part of her journey. Maya had sat down in the assistant's chair, her legs unable to hold her weight as she processed this information. Part of her was furious that he had made such a monumental decision without including her, that he had decided what she could or couldn't handle. But another part of her, the part that had chosen a career dedicated to helping others, understood the fear that had driven him. She thought about the scared young man facing his mortality, trying to protect someone he loved by pushing them away. It didn't make it right, but it made it human, flawed, heartbreakingly understandable. If this story has touched your heart so far, if you've ever struggled with letting go of the past or understanding the complicated choices people make out of love, please consider sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it. Take a moment to like and subscribe, because these stories are created to remind us all of the beautiful complexity of human connection. Your support helps us continue bringing these emotional journeys to life. The weeks that followed were filled with careful steps toward rebuilding something that had been shattered, but perhaps not destroyed. Ethan began picking Maya up after work, and they would walk through the city's botanical gardens, where cherry blossoms still bloomed every spring. They talked about everything they had missed in each other's lives, filling in the gaps of 5 years with stories and confessions and slowly rebuilding trust. Maya introduced him to her mother, who cried when she saw them together, because she had never stopped believing that Maya's first love was her truest love. Ethan brought Maya to meet his mother on one of her good days, and the older woman had held Maya's hand and whispered that she remembered her from the photographs Ethan used to keep by his bedside, the ones he thought she didn't know about. Maya discovered that falling in love the second time was different from the first. There was less naivety, more wisdom. There was awareness of how fragile happiness could be, how quickly life could change. But there was also a deeper appreciation for the gift of a second chance, for the miracle of finding your way back to someone you thought was lost forever. She watched Ethan interact with her young patients, saw how naturally he connected with children, how he would make them laugh while they waited in the reception area. She saw him handle his mother's difficult days with patience and grace, never losing his temper even when she didn't recognize him, simply loving her through the fog of her fading memories. One evening, 8 months after Ethan's first appointment, Maya was locking up the clinic when she noticed him standing outside, holding something behind his back. The sun was setting behind him, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the boy she had fallen in love with in university, full of hope and possibility. He brought his hand forward, revealing not a ring box as she had half expected, but a small potted cherry blossom tree, still young and fragile but full of potential. Before I share what happens next, I need to ask something of you, dear viewers. If this story has reminded you of the power of second chances, of forgiveness, of the courage it takes to love again after being hurt, please leave a comment below telling us about a time when you chose hope over fear. Your stories inspire others who might be struggling with their own hearts right now. Take a moment to share your experience. It might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Ethan had explained that he had been growing the tree from a cutting for months, nurturing it carefully, wanting to give her something that represented new growth rooted in old memories. He told her that he didn't have all the answers, that he couldn't promise a perfect life without challenges or pain, but he could promise to never walk away again, to face whatever came together. Maya had taken the small tree in her hands, feeling the weight of the gesture, the symbolism of something beautiful that needed care and time to flourish, but that held within it the promise of spectacular blooms. She had looked at this man who had broken her heart and then painstakingly worked to mend it, who had shown her through actions and not just words that people could change, could grow, could become brave enough to choose love even when it scared them. And she had realized that her gift for healing, for helping others overcome their fears, had to extend to herself. She had to be brave enough to believe in second chances, to plant this tree and tend it and trust that it would bloom. In her dental practice, Maya had always told her anxious patients that healing required patience, that some things couldn't be rushed, that trust was built through consistent gentle care over time. She had never realized that she was also teaching herself the lesson she would need for her own heart as she stood there holding the cherry blossom tree with the man she had never stopped loving despite everything. Maya understood that some feelings couldn't be treated with clinical precision, couldn't be extracted like a bad tooth or filled like a cavity. Some feelings had to be honored, nurtured, given space to grow again even in soil that had once seemed barren. The story of Dr. Maya Chen and Ethan Rivers didn't end that evening with the sunset and the symbolic tree. It continued in the daily choice to show up for each other, in the wedding they planned for the following spring under blooming cherry blossoms, in the way Maya's practice expanded to include a volunteer program serving underprivileged children, while Ethan's bridges continued connecting divided communities. It continued in the adoption of their daughter 3 years later, a little girl who needed parents who understood that broken things could be made whole again. Their story lived in every patient. Maya treated with extra compassion because she knew what it meant to be vulnerable and afraid. And in every project, Ethan designed with the knowledge that the strongest structures were those built to withstand storms while remaining open to beauty. But perhaps the real ending or beginning was in the understanding that love, like dentistry, was part science and part art. It required skill and knowledge, yes, but also intuition, patience, and the willingness to work carefully with something precious and irreplaceable. Maya had spent years learning to treat her patients' pain, but Ethan had taught her that some wounds heal not by being fixed, but by being acknowledged, forgiven, and transformed into wisdom. And in the end, the feeling she couldn't treat with any instrument in her clinic was the very thing that had saved them both. A love resilient enough to survive separation, mature enough to embrace imperfection, and brave enough to bloom again.